Broken releases, delays, cancellations. What's going on with AAA games? With multi-million-dollar budgets and hundreds of developers, why can't these studios ever actually finish a game? In comment sections everywhere, you'll see the same theory: lazy developers. But as a game developer myself, I have to say, this could not be further from the truth. If streamers and commenters are to be believed, then if a AAA game gets delayed, cancelled, or fails to meet sales expectations, then it was either woke, or the developers were simply not working hard enough to get it across the finish line.
Why do I think QA is the problem? I think number one, it's probably because they hire people that are stupid.
The fact that the game runs this poorly on a supposedly superior piece of hardware is 100% the fault of Konami's lazy approach to optimization.
The best talent has aged out of the gaming industry, and they're quickly being replaced with amateurs and women who are bad at their job. Amateurs and women who are bad at their job.
Oh, sorry, if you haven't seen my videos before, hi there. My name's Eric Crosby. I've worked in AAA games for the past 3 years and indie development for another 4 years prior. My job titles have included words like senior, expert, and lead. This gives me at least some credibility to speak on the topic of game development from an inside perspective. It is true that AAA games are taking longer to make. It's true that many of them are no longer meeting their sales targets. It's also true that some games are being released without adequate bug fixing and optimization. It's easy to point to wokeness or lazy developers as the explanation. The reason it's easy to do so is not because it's true, but rather because these explanations require zero critical thinking. When a creator derides wokeness in gaming or blames lackluster reviews on laziness, they're speaking with zero authority on the subject. They've done no research, they haven't spoken to any developers, they're just latching on to the latest rage bait discourse that will generate the most engagement. Reality is not this simple. Game development is complicated, difficult, and often messy. In my opinion, it's a small miracle that any games get released at all. So today, I want to talk to you about why games are so hard to make. We'll explore why so many games are getting delayed, released unfinished, or outright cancelled. My hope is that this will inspire a deeper respect and appreciation for the people who make the games you play. So, let's begin by asking, are developers just lazy? Game development is not a normal career. Even with a degree, it can be nearly impossible to find your way in, and even harder to stay in. Job requirements are tough, standards are high, and layoffs are constant. The number of people who want to work in games is huge, but the number of entry-level jobs is next to zero. And what this means is that to compete, you have to be one of the best. So, how do you get there? The first step in a game development career is usually education, either through a college degree or self-teaching with online courses or videos. But what these will not teach you is that simply learning these skills is not enough to land you a job in the industry, unless you either know somebody or have incredible luck. After learning a particular skill set, like 3D art or programming, you'll have to assemble a portfolio of work that proves you're good enough for a production environment. For 3D artists like myself, this can mean working for months on a single piece that shows that you're ready for the job. In most cases, and certainly for myself, it can take years of practice to reach AAA quality. Other disciplines don't seem to fare much better, expecting strong portfolios of work that demonstrate competence in their core skills. With entry-level roles so hard to come by, most aspiring developers end up working in other fields just to make ends meet. They spend months or years working on their portfolio in their spare time until they can be considered junior material. Some are gifted enough to accomplish this faster, or lucky enough to live with their parents rent-free until they can muster a meaty enough portfolio. But it takes an inordinate amount of time, energy, and confidence to create and display this work. So by the time someone even gets a junior position, they've already been working on these skills for years without pay. For some, it happens faster, but for others, even slower. And the thing is, once you have your first job, the portfolio requirements don't just go away. Intermediate or senior positions often expect much higher quality work. So everything you made just to get that junior role, you're probably going to either have to redo it or make something new to replace it. For most developers, this means working on their portfolios diligently in their spare time. Some might spend an hour a week, an hour a day, but often even more. All this after doing the exact same thing for 8 hours a day. And sadly, none of this guarantees success, especially not now. With so many layoffs and studio closures, the number of highly skilled applicants is at an all-time high, and the number of jobs is staggeringly low. To break through, one must have an exceptional portfolio, great interview skills, and no small amount of luck. So, anyone working in a AAA studio is not only good at what they do, but one of the best. With vanishingly rare exception, these developers have fought tooth and nail just to be employed where they are. Is this the behavior of lazy, uninspired people? Absolutely not. With how hard it is just to get a job, most developers have a great sense of pride and reverence for their work. Even if they don't love the game they're working on or the studio they work for, the sheer fact that they are employed means that they will try their hardest to stay employed. In my experience, I've seen this leads to a constant drive and passion for improving at the craft. Developers are constantly looking for new ways to solve old problems, tools to improve efficiency, and techniques to make their games better. This is doubly true for indies, who often gamble their livelihood on the success of one passion project. The majority of indie games are entirely self-funded. Failure can mean losing one's entire life savings. Thus, nobody is more inclined to try their hardest to make their games great. So, if all this is true and developers really are so hardworking, then why do games still take so long? Why do they come out broken? If everyone in this industry is so good at what they do, then why are there any mediocre games at all? The biggest problem with game development is scale. Gameplay and graphics have improved dramatically in the span of just a few decades. Generational leaps used to be revolutionary, and that set the standard that games should constantly be getting bigger, better, and prettier. And with this expectation lodged firmly in their minds, players demanded more and more every year. And this is not to place any blame on the audience, mind you. The game industry itself set this expectation through its obsession with fancy graphics and massive open worlds. However, the pace of this progress was never going to be sustainable. On the subject of graphics alone, conversations have lately skewed toward questioning if games are actually starting to look worse. And some cherry-picked examples might seem to demonstrate this, but others prove this notion utterly wrong. Still, it's undeniable that the pace of graphical advancement has slowed. The reality is that new console generations no longer represent dramatic revolutions in graphical fidelity. Yet, while the pace of technological development has slowed, the expectation for constant improvement is still fixed in players' minds. So, if games can no longer leap forward graphically, they have to leap forward in scale. I'm sure you've heard claims that a game under 20 hours is too short, or that players want to get their money's worth by getting at least 1 hour of content for each dollar spent. But this was never the case until the era of modern AAA open worlds. 100-hour experiences were reserved for hardcore dungeon-crawling RPGs or strategy games, not single-player narratives. Now, AAA games have grown impossibly large, with massive open worlds demanding 50 or 100 hours of playtime. And Ubisoft is the poster child for this content gluttony. Assassin's Creed 2 averaged around 35 hours for total completion, where Assassin's Creed Valhalla takes almost 150. And Sony's flagship series like God of War and Horizon have similarly been bloated with content. To sell a $600 console, everything has to be bigger, better, and shinier. And these expectations don't just come from players, but also from the market forces that drive video game production. If shareholders feel that a 50-hour game will give them a better return than a 20-hour game, then by God, the game will be 50 hours or die trying. If executives decide their legacy franchise would make slightly more money as a live service looter shooter, then that is what the developers will have to make. Despite the passion or skill of individual developers, these top-down requirements can sorely hinder their ability to deliver a polished final product. And these demands don't often come with the promise of extra budget or more development time. Quite the opposite. Corporate overlords expect developers to somehow make a better game with fancier graphics and more content and make it faster and cheaper than the last game. The reality is, this is simply not possible. This is why we see so many game delays and cancellations. Sometimes, the business will decide a game is worth finishing to recoup costs and give the developers more time. Or they might decide the game must ship by an arbitrary deadline regardless of whether it's finished or even functional. And this is how we wind up with games like Cyberpunk 2077. With enough time and effort, these games can become masterpieces, but it is a monumental task to win back players' trust after such a disastrous launch. You can only really get away with this once. And this combination of high expectations and unrealistic deadlines is how the industry developed its toxic crunch culture. Thankfully, more studios are making efforts to reduce crunch and give developers more of their free time back. And this is another reason why games are taking longer to make, though encouragingly, this is at least good news for the developers. I've seen these efforts pay off in my own career. In college, I was warned of terrible 80-hour work weeks and constant all-nighters. Yet, in my experience so far, I've only been asked to work overtime twice. According to a 2024 survey by the IGDA, only 28% of developers reported crunch time as part of their job at all. That number was 52% in 2014. Obviously, this is a dramatic improvement. However, developers working more regular hours means that games will take more time to create than if everyone was crunching. Personally, I'd rather wait a few more months to play a new game if I know the developers don't have to ruin their lives just to finish it. And despite this overall downward trend, crunch does still happen, especially on monolithic AAA projects. Players' demand for more content and investors' demand for higher returns will always win over the work-life balance of developers. This could mean a few weeks of crunching toward the end of a project, or months of grueling overtime and sleepless nights. And there are some developers who are willing to make that sacrifice for their projects, but that does not make it ethical for their employers or their fans to expect it of them. There is no video game that is worth ruining the lives of the real human beings whose work we all enjoy. Now, it's also not realistic to expect gamers to lower their expectations for what AAA should mean. The bar has been set, and set incredibly high by games like Horizon and Ghost of Tsushima. And I know that I want more games like those, but I don't want them to come at the cost of crunch, mass layoffs, and abusing low-paid overseas workers. There are solutions, however, and some are already being explored by major developers. One option is simply giving games more time in the oven before release. Now, this is where investors start to get scared, but the high-profile backlash against games like Cyberpunk 2077 has encouraged some major firms to take a more cautious approach. Ubisoft, for example, delayed the recent Assassin's Creed Shadows by several months to avoid the same backlash Star Wars Outlaws had incited. And this is a promising sign, though for many games, a few extra months would not be enough. And this is where external developers come in. Many new studios are pitching themselves as independent contractors, experts in game development that other firms can hire on for some or all of a game's production. This way, studios can operate on a leaner headcount and smaller budget during pre-production, then ramp up work with external developers during active development. In some cases, entire games have been outsourced to these studios, like the recent remake of Oblivion. Of course, this presents its own set of problems. Communication between multiple studios might break down. External contractors might abuse foreign workers in countries with weaker labor protections and lower salaries. Outsourcing might inflate budgets and timelines with more meetings and feedback. And these issues would have to be resolved before this kind of development would be any better than what we have right now. This is not yet the case. Even talented teams like Virtuos, the studio behind the Oblivion remake, are still getting hit with layoffs after project completion. These studios ultimately react to the needs of their clients, and right now, budgets are tightening and studios are shrinking. There just isn't enough money to throw around to external partners. The future of the game industry is impossible to predict. Right now, things aren't looking great. More layoffs are being announced every week, AI is threatening more jobs, and large publishers continue to chase the white whale of creating the next Fortnite. I don't know, maybe if they'd read Moby Dick, they would know what happens to people who try to chase whales. If there's any cause for optimism at the moment, it's that developers still love making games. Indie games have never been better and more diverse than they are right now. Of course, it's great fun to get excited for the next big AAA open world. I know I always do. But while you wait, try cracking open Steam or itch and trying out some smaller games from developers you've never heard of. They might not all be winners, but at least your money is going to someone who is just as passionate about games as you are. By the way, please don't refund indie games on Steam. If you spent $90 on a AAA game and it's not clicking, then sure, go ahead. But when the game costs less than a matcha latte, heck, even if you hate it after an hour, just keep it in your library. You never know, maybe you'll come around on it one day, and the developers will really appreciate the extra cash. After all, even if you don't like this game, their next game might be your new favorite. The people who make the games you love are in a tough spot right now, especially those affected by the thousands of layoffs over the past 3 years. You can help them by buying and playing their games, and by showing patience and understanding when more games inevitably miss their release windows. Again, you don't need to have any sympathy for the shareholders or CEOs, just try to show compassion for the developers who pour their souls into these works of art. The game industry is in a bad place right now, but we can all do our best to support those who are most affected. Look out for new projects by the victims of mass layoffs. Vote with your wallet and support studios who treat their employees with care and respect. Buy more indie games you might never play. Be patient and be kind. Game developers are not lazy. They struggle for their craft, and they take pride in it. Place the blame where it belongs, and save your hate for those whose only motive is profit. Remember, a bad game is still a work of art, but a bad product hurts both its creators and its consumers. Support those who treat games as more than just a product, and I promise you will never be hurt again. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. I appreciate you joining me for this comeback video. I know it's a different style to the ones that I've made before, and I know maybe you weren't expecting to see my face, but this style of production is a lot faster and easier. It allows me to still make these videos while maintaining a full-time job. Now, I want to keep making them. I want to make them more often, definitely a lot more often than I have been making them. And the best way that you can help me do that is by sharing these videos. You can post it on Reddit, share it in your Discord server, send it to your friends, do anything that you can to make sure it gets as much reach as possible. I'm also planning to bring back the Patreon eventually. I shut it down last year because I hadn't made a video in a long time, but now I'm planning to come back to active video production and try to get them out at least once a month. And if I can do that, my goal is to set the Patreon up for a monthly charge instead of a per video charge like I was doing before. This is so I can support myself in producing these things. I want to invest in better lighting and a better camera so that I can make these parts where I'm on screen match up with the quality of the gameplay recording I want to do. And all of this costs money, of course, so every little bit that you guys can pitch in once I set that Patreon back up will go a long way in helping me continue this ambition. So thank you again so much for watching. I'll see you next time.